My name is Thomas Whitfield. I was 23 years old that winter, and I had been a Royal Guard for 6 months, 2 weeks and 4 days. I remember the exact count because I had written it inside the back cover of my notebook, in pencil, the way a child marks days on a wall. I'm older now. I do not stand watch anymore. But there are nights, even now, when I close my eyes and I am back in that corridor at Windsor, with the cold reaching up through the stones into the bones of my feet, and the long silence pressing against my ears, and 3 voices in my head that did not agree with one another. This is the story of that night. I have told it only a few times, and never fully. I am telling it now because I think I finally understand what happened. The shift began at 9 in the evening. It was a Tuesday in late January. The wind outside the castle walls had a thin, cutting edge to it, the kind of cold that does not roar but slips quietly under doors and along the seams of your coat. Inside, the state apartments were lit only by the soft amber of the night lamps. Every second one switched off to save power, and the long carpets ran into shadow at both ends of the corridor. I took up my post at the door near the crimson drawing room, exactly where the post order said I should stand, exactly facing the direction the post order said I should face. I checked my pocket watch. 9:03, the watch had been my grandfather's. He had been a guard too long ago in a different reign. He had given it to me the week I was sworn in, and he had said only this: a guard who watches the time watches himself. I did not understand what he meant then. I would understand it later that night. The first hour passed the way first hours always pass, slow, quiet. The kind of slow that makes a young man's mind wander into small places. I thought about my mother's kitchen. I thought about a girl I had taken to the cinema in Slough the previous Sunday, and whether she had liked me. I thought about the weight of the rifle on my shoulder, and how it was beginning to feel less like a weight and more like a part of my arm. I thought, briefly and shamefully, about how badly I needed to use the lavatory, and how I had been warned by older guards that this was the test no one ever spoke about. At a few minutes past 10, I heard footsteps coming down the long carpeted approach, slow, even, unhurried. I knew the footsteps before I saw the man, Sergeant Major Davies, 28 years in the service. A face like a slab of old oak, and eyes that had seen every mistake a young guard could make, and a few that had not yet been invented. He stopped in front of me. He looked me up and down the way a tailor looks at a suit he is about to alter. Then he said, in that low, quiet voice of his, Whitfield, "Sergeant Major, you know your post order." "Yes, Sergeant Major, recite the relevant section." I recited it, word for word, where I was to stand, what I was to challenge, who could approach without challenge, what I was to do if any unauthorized person attempted to pass. The conditions under which I was to leave the post, which were essentially none. He listened without expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That post order was written by men who have stood where you are standing. Some of them are dead now. Some of them are alive but old. All of them knew more than you do. You will follow it, not me. Not anyone else who walks down this corridor tonight. Not the captain, not the colonel, not God himself if he arrives in epaulets. Do you understand?" I said I did. He nodded once. He turned. He walked away. His footsteps faded into the long carpeted shadow at the end of the corridor. And then there was silence again, and I was alone with the lamps and the cold stones and the slow, steady beat of a clock somewhere very far away. I checked my pocket watch, 10:14. I remember the time exactly. I remember because I thought, in that small private way you think things when no one can hear you. That is the first order of the night. The Sergeant Major has spoken. The post order is the only law. I tucked the watch back into my tunic. I straightened my shoulders. The cold went on reaching up through the stones, and somewhere outside the wind found a loose pane and made it whisper, and the castle held its breath the way old buildings do at night, as if it were listening. I did not yet know that 2 more voices were coming. The second hour was colder than the first. The heating in the state apartments was old and tired, and at night it sighed through the pipes in long, uneven breaths, warm for a few minutes, then forgotten for a quarter of an hour. I learned to listen for the warmth. I learned to time my small adjustments, a roll of the shoulder, a shift of the weight from one heel to the other, to the moments when the building exhaled heat. You learn these things when you stand still for long enough. You learn that stillness is not the absence of movement. Stillness is movement made very small and very quiet. At 23 minutes past 10, I heard a different set of footsteps. Lighter, quicker. A woman's stride, but firm, military, with the small clean tap of a polished heel on the polished floor where the carpet ended and the marble began. Captain Eleanor Brooks came around the corner with a clipboard under one arm and a thermos in the other hand. She was perhaps 40. She had the kind of face that did not invite small talk, but did not refuse it either. She was duty officer that night, which meant she was the one who would carry the consequences of every guard's mistakes across the whole castle, and she carried this knowledge in her posture, the way other people carry a heavy bag. She stopped in front of me, she looked at the post, she looked at the corridor, she looked at me. Then she did something I did not expect. She offered me the thermos. "No, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am. It's only tea, Whitfield. You can drink tea on post if no one is approaching, and you set the cup down before they reach you. The post order doesn't forbid it." I did not know what to say. I had been told very firmly that nothing on this earth was to be done on post except the post itself. She watched me hesitate. Then she smiled, very small, very tired. "Davies has been by, hasn't he?" "Yes, ma'am." "And he told you the post order is the only law?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded, the way one nods at an old joke one has heard many times. She set the thermos down on the marble. She tucked the clipboard under her other arm. Then she said the thing that would not leave me alone for the rest of the night. "Whitfield, the post order is a good document. It was written by good men, but it is a document. It is paper. It does not know what is happening in this corridor at 23 minutes past 10 on a Tuesday in January. You do. So when something happens that the post order did not foresee, you will use your judgment. You will act in the spirit of the order, not the letter. And you will log everything, every footstep, every voice, every face, everything. Because if there is ever a question about what happened tonight, the log is what will save you. Not the post order, not me. The log. Do you understand?" I said I did. But I did not, really, because what she had just told me was not the same as what Davies had told me. Not quite. Davies had said, follow the paper. Brooks had said, follow the spirit, and write everything down. To a young guard standing still in a cold corridor at night, those two instructions began to feel slowly, like two hands pulling at the same sleeve from different directions. She picked up her thermos. She looked at me for a moment longer, the way a mother looks at a child she is sending out into weather she cannot predict. Then she walked on down the corridor and turned the corner and was gone. I checked my pocket watch. 10:31, second order of the night. I did not yet feel troubled. I felt the way a young man feels when two of his teachers have given slightly different homework, a small private confusion, easily set aside. I set it aside. I straightened my shoulders. The pipe sighed warm air for a few seconds, and then forgot, and the cold came back. Somewhere in the depths of the castle, a clock struck 11. The sound traveled through the stones, the way sounds travel underwater, slow, muffled, arriving in your chest before it arrived in your ears. I counted the strokes. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 11. And then the long silence afterward, which is, I think, the truest silence in the world. The silence after a bell. I stood in that silence for a long time. I did not know it then, but I was standing in the last quiet hour of the night. It was 3 minutes past midnight when the third set of footsteps came. These ones I did not hear approach. That is the part I remember most clearly, even now. Davies's footsteps had been slow, and even Brooks's had been light and quick. But the third man was already standing at the end of the corridor when I noticed him. As though he had not walked there at all, as though he had simply arrived. He was tall. He wore the dark uniform of household operations, with the small discreet braid at the cuff that marks a colonel of that branch. His hair was iron gray, cut very close. His face was the face of a man who had not slept properly in many years and had stopped expecting to. I had heard his name before in the guard room, spoken in the careful low voice that men use for senior officers they neither love nor trust. Colonel Reginald Hartley. He walked down the corridor toward me. He did not hurry. He stopped a precise 2 paces from me and looked at me the way a man looks at a tool he is considering using. "Guardsman Whitfield, sir, you will receive a visitor through this corridor in approximately 1 hour. The visitor will come from the direction of the service stairwell. The visitor will be a gentleman in a dark coat, unaccompanied. You will not challenge him. You will not address him. You will not log him. You will allow him to pass, and you will allow him to return. And as far as your post is concerned, this corridor was empty all night. Do you understand? I felt the cold reach a little higher inside my coat. I felt the weight of the rifle on my shoulder become, for the first time that evening, a real weight. I said, "Sir, the post order requires me to challenge any person approaching this corridor between the hours of 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning, regardless of dress or bearing, unless they are on the pre-cleared list, which I have on my person and which I am required to check." He did not react. He waited the way a teacher waits for a child to finish a wrong answer. When I had finished, he said, "I am aware of the post order. I am instructing you, by the authority of the palace, to set it aside for this single matter on this single night. Do you understand?" I said, "Sir, Captain Brooks has instructed me to log everything that happens on this post tonight." His eyes moved very slightly. I do not think he had expected me to mention her. Captain Brooks's instruction is a general one. Mine is specific. The specific overrides the general. You will not log this matter. Do you understand? I said. "Sir, Sergeant Major Davies has instructed me to follow the post order and no other voice, including those of senior officers on this shift." He was quiet for a long time. The corridor was very still. Somewhere far below us, in the lower passages of the castle, a door closed softly. The sound came up through the stones the way the clock had earlier, muffled and slow, arriving in the chest before the ears. When the colonel finally spoke, his voice had changed. It was not angry, it was something colder than anger. It was the voice of a man who has decided not to argue, because arguing would acknowledge that an argument was possible. "Guardsman Whitfield, I am not asking. I am ordering. By the palace's authority, you will allow the visitor to pass. You will not log him. You will be silent about him. If there are consequences, they will fall on me, not on you." "Do you understand?" I said. "Yes, sir." But I said it because I did not yet know what else to say. Inside my chest, somewhere underneath the ribs, something had begun to tighten very slowly, the way a rope tightens when two men pull on opposite ends of it without knowing the other is there. He held my eyes for one more moment. Then he turned. He walked back down the corridor. He did not hurry. And like before, I did not hear his footsteps fade. He simply at some point was no longer there. I stood alone in the corridor. The lamps burned their small amber light. The pipes sighed once and forgot. I took out my pocket watch with a hand that was steadier than I felt. I opened it. 12:11. 3 orders. Follow the post order. Use your judgment and log everything. Let the visitor pass in silence. 3 orders that could not all be obeyed. 3 voices, each of them senior to me. Each of them carrying the weight of years and rank, and the long quiet authority of the institution itself, and one of me, 23 years old, 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days into the service. Standing in a corridor at Windsor at 12 minutes past midnight on a Tuesday in January, with the cold coming up through the stones, and a visitor I did not know about to walk toward me from a stairwell I could not yet see. I closed the watch. I tucked it back into my tunic. My hands, I noticed for the first time, were very cold. The next hour did not pass the way hours pass. It moved in pieces. I would notice the time and then I would notice it again. And the gap between the two noticings would not match what my body had felt. 12:11 became 12:34 became 12:52 became 1:10. And I could not have told you what had happened in between, except that I had been standing very still and breathing very carefully and trying to think. I tried to think the way Davies would think. The paper is the paper. Follow it. The colonel is a colonel, but the post order is older than the colonel, and it will outlive him, and it will outlive me, and a guard who breaks his post order has broken something that does not repair. This was true. I could feel that it was true. I tried to think the way Brooks would think. The paper cannot foresee this. A senior officer of household operations has given a direct instruction. To refuse him would be to put myself above my rank. To obey him without record would be to put him above his rank. Log everything, act in the spirit. Let the record decide later. This was also true. I could feel that this was also true. I tried to think the way the colonel would think. There are matters in this house that move in private. There are people who pass through corridors at night because their lives are public in every other hour. and they are entitled to one corridor and 1 hour that is theirs. A guard who cannot give them, that is a guard who has not understood what he is guarding. And this also, in some quiet, uncomfortable way, was true. 3 true things, and they could not all be acted on. I think it was at this point, somewhere in that long, uneven hour, that I began to understand something my grandfather had once said to me when I was a boy. He had said, "Tom, the hardest thing in the service is not the cold, and not the standing, and not the rifle. The hardest thing is when grown men, all of them honest, all of them senior to you, give you orders that fight each other. And you, the boy at the bottom, must decide, and you will be wrong. You will always be wrong. The trick is to be wrong in the smallest way." I had thought, when he said it, that he was talking about wars I would never see. I had not understood that he was talking about a Tuesday in January in a corridor at Windsor. At 1:20 in the morning, I heard the door at the end of the service stairwell open. It opened quietly. Whoever was opening it knew how to open a door in a castle at night. The sound was no more than a soft draw of air, the small change in pressure that an old building registers before it registers the sound itself. I felt the corridor change before I heard the footsteps. The footsteps were slow. Tired, I thought. Not the tired of a man who has worked too long, but the tired of a man who has carried something heavy for so many years that he has stopped noticing the carrying and only notices sometimes the weight. He came around the corner. He was older than I had expected. Late 70s, perhaps? He wore a plain dark coat over what looked like ordinary trousers and a soft scarf at his throat, and he carried nothing. He had no escort. He moved the way a man moves through his own house at night when he does not wish to wake anyone, carefully, but without hesitation, knowing the floors. His face, when he came close enough that the lamps fell on it, was a face I knew not from meeting. From 1,000 photographs, from newspapers folded on kitchen tables, from the small framed picture on the wall of my grandfather's sitting room, he saw me. He did not slow. He did not look surprised. I had perhaps 4 seconds. I thought of Davies, the post order, challenge. I thought of Brooks, log everything, act in the spirit. I thought of the colonel's silence. Let him pass. And then I thought of something else. I thought of my grandfather, who had stood in corridors like this one, in a different reign, for 31 years. And I thought, the spirit of every order in this house is the same. Every one of them at the bottom is trying to protect this man. Davies's paper protects him. Brooks's log protects him. The colonel's silence protects him. They are not 3 orders. They are 3 guards on the same man standing in 3 different doorways. I straightened. I brought my heels together. I said, very quietly, the way one speaks in a room where someone is sleeping, "Good evening, sir." He stopped, only for a moment. He looked at me, really looked at me, the way a man looks at another man, not the way a figure looks at a uniform. He had gray eyes. They were tired and very kind. He said, "Good evening, guardsman," that was all. He walked on. His footsteps went down the long corridor and turned at the far end and faded into a part of the castle I had never seen. I took out my pocket watch. My hand, this time, was not steady. 1:23. I opened my notebook. I wrote, in pencil, in the careful small letters my grandfather had taught me, "UA 123, gentleman passed post northbound from service stairwell. Acknowledged. No challenge required by recognition. No incident." I closed the notebook. I tucked it back into my tunic. I stood at my post. I had not followed Davies. I had not followed Brooks fully. I had not followed the colonel at all. I had spoken when I had been told to be silent, and I had logged when I had been told not to log, and I had not challenged when challenge had been required. And yet, standing there in the cold corridor with my hand still trembling slightly from the moment of the old man's eyes meeting mine, I felt for the first time that night that I had not been wrong, not entirely. I had been wrong in the smallest way I could find. I would like to tell you that the rest of the night was quiet. It was not at 1:41. Colonel Hartley came back down the corridor. He walked faster this time. His face, when the lamps caught it, was no longer the face of a man considering a tool. It was the face of a man who had been told something he had not expected, and who had not yet decided whom to be angry with. He stopped in front of me. He said, "You spoke to him." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I instructed you not to." I said, "Yes, sir." He said why I had been preparing the answer for 18 minutes. I gave it as quietly as I could. I said. "Sir, I judged that a complete absence of acknowledgement in a corridor where a guard was clearly posted and clearly visible would have been more conspicuous than a quiet greeting. I judged that the spirit of your order was the gentleman's privacy, and that his privacy was better served by an ordinary exchange than by an unnatural silence. If I was wrong, sir, the fault is mine, and I will accept it." He was quiet for a long time. He did not answer me. Before he could, I heard footsteps from the other direction. Quick, light, military. Captain Brooks came around the corner with the clipboard still under her arm. Behind her, perhaps 10 paces, walked Sergeant Major Davies in no hurry at all, the way a man walks who has decided the building can wait for him. They stopped, all three of them, in the corridor in front of me. I have never, before or since, stood in front of 3 angry senior officers at the same time. I hope none of you ever has to. There is a kind of stillness that descends on a young man at such a moment, which is not fear exactly, but is its close cousin, the cousin who knocks at the door politely and then stays. Captain Brooks spoke first. She said, "Whitfield, your log." I gave her the notebook. She read the line. She looked up. Her face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. She handed the notebook to Davies without a word. Davies read the line. He handed it to the colonel. The colonel read it. He did not hand it back. Davies spoke next. He said, "You spoke." I said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." Davies said, "The post order does not authorize speech."